Thank you, Mrs. Harland. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Mr. Robert Hutchings. I'll be chairing the hearing today. I'm joined on the panel by Mr. Ron Merritt and Mr. Clay Purvis. Our secretary today is Mrs. Harland. The assessor representing the Assessment and Taxation Department, City of Winnipeg, is Ms. DeRockney. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with this board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant and the panel may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questioning again by both parties. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions based on the evidence presented today. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items number 1, 2, and 11 on our docket today. Mrs. Harland, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Karine Dorakini.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, would you please stand? Would you please state your full name?
My name is Jared Story.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harland. First item on the docket today is item number 1, file number 24-1813. Address is 234 Jarvis Avenue. Roll number is 14-001141-000. Can the assessor please proceed? 234 Jarvis Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a recommendation due to the current condition of the building. A supplementary notice has been issued to adjust the 2025 value to $364,000, and effective February 27, 2024 for the 2024 value adjusted to $312,000. Reason being there was a fire adjacent to the subject property and it was affected. It is my understanding that Mr. Story will confirm the value.
Okay. Would you mind, please, for the record, going through a summary, quick summary of the subject property, the characteristics and the location, that kind of thing, please?
Of course, of course. So it consists of one building with 2 premises with 1 story, built in 1909. A wall height of 11 feet is the actual wall height of the building. Leasable area is 6133 6133 square feet and a land to plan area of 1.09. On page 8 is a map we've provided and some exterior photos, along with page 10 and 11. Provide a for the income and expense report. So we did revise it with that new value. So the one on page 4 will be different. With the two premises of the 6133 square feet, we have a blended rent of $7.35. That provides a potential rent of $45,099. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. Plus expenses at 3%, with a shortfall of $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $41,015. Overall capitalization rate of 8.45%, and which generates our capitalized value of $485,385. We've placed an adjustment of 25% vacancy, in which provides our final value of $364,000.
Okay.
Questions?
Yes, maybe I will confirm everything right now. So you're using the existing on page 4, the existing net operating income of 41,015, but you've revised the cap rate from 7.25% to, I believe, 8.45%. Is that what you said?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, revised, coming up with a recommendation of $364,000. And since we're only dealing with a 2025 appeal now, you had said you had done for 2024, though that's irrelevant to us. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and a supplementary notice has already been mailed out with those values.
Okay. 364. Okay. Okay. Mr. Story, any questions on the evidence presented by the assessor?
No, no questions, sir, but I will just remark that we did work with the assessor on this value based on this unique situation, and I can confirm in speaking with the owner that the supplementary documents have now been received. So all is in good order, and we are simply asking for confirmation of the current value as it is indeed supplanted by the supplementaries that have been issued. So all is well from our perspective, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the assessor?
I have none, Mr. Chairman, other than the city has gone from the cap rate of 7.25% to 8.25%. Is that correct?
8.45.
8.45. Okay. I thank you. And Mr. Story has agreed to the value of $364,000, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, you were going to deal with the non-co-op?
I don't believe we had the request on this one.
Okay.
Am I correct?
That's for Arlington, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. That's for item number 2.
Okay.
Mr. Merritt? Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Purvis, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
No, sorry, I don't have any questions with the assessor's evidence.
Thank you. Okay. I'm a bit confused, as usual. So you've requested a you've requested a verbal recommendation to revise the assessment to $364,000. But the applicant has said they already received the supplementary assessment. He's saying it's confirmed that the assessment is now $364,000, right? So are we doing a recommendation or are we just?
Sure, the supplementary will supplant anything that occurs today.
Yeah,
So it's a timing issue. So at the time of writing 2
Ah.
weeks ago, we were waiting for that supplementary. So our intention was to simply confirm or accept the recommendation in anticipation of that supplementary, but it did move very quickly. So we did receive it, which is
Okay.
great. So ultimately, the value is 364, but I guess anything that we do here is actually ultimately supplanted by the supplementary that's now been issued. So if that, I don't know if that helps or confuses things more, but ultimately the value of 364 is fine. And this is a unique situation where there was a fire at the property next door, which impacted our subject. So we inspected it with the assessor, and we came to this remedy to capture the present physical condition as of the date of the fire, which was in 24. So that's the whole story. Yeah.
okay. You know what? I think Mr. Merritt, Mr. Purvis, I think we'll discuss how we're gonna word this in our decisions at the end, I guess.
Yeah. Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, mainly because Mr. Story in his letter was seeking he wanted a 54-1, in other words, a confirmation. So,
Mhm.
like you
Mhm.
say, we will probably discuss that in regards to the wording.
Yeah, okay, okay. Now, Mr. Story, you had a brief that you submitted. Shall we just go to that and I would like you to summarize it.
Sure.
I guess you just submitted a letter, is that
It's
right?
simply a letter requesting confirmation. Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you mind for the record reading that or just summarizing that, please?
Sure, yeah, just so briefly, as I mentioned, there was a unique circumstance. There was a fire at the Imperial Soap Warehouse on Jarvis, next door to our property, which damaged a large section of the subject property. So in viewing the property with the assessor, inspecting it on our own, and then attending the property with a member of the assessment department. They agreed to work with the owner in order to adjust the value effective to the date of the fire. And that's where you see that adjustment to the vacancy based on the fact that there's a large section of this property that's no longer capable of occupancy. And it's sort of in called a bit of a limbo state now as insurance and those different machinations work through the system. So this was at the time of appeal. This was sort of news to us. It was on the first inspection, we saw that there was a charred wall and a giant pile of rubble. So we spoke with the assessor and they were amenable to working it out with us, leading to the issuance of this supplementary. So for the purpose of our exercise today, I will simply request that the 364 be accepted, but in my initial submission, we were simply requesting confirmation. So if you were to confirm the value, that's fine. It's supplanted by the supplementary anyway, and all is now in good order from our perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Story. Does the assessor have any questions of the applicant?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Purvis, any questions of the applicant?
Have any?
Thank you. Mr. Merritt?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. And neither do I. Leave it with us. That concludes item number 1, 2, 3, 4 Jarvis Avenue. Next item on the docket is item number 2, file number 24-2075. The address is 1466 Arlington Street. And dealing with the 2025 Realty Assessment Appeal, roll numbers 14-0221-46100. And from reviewing the brief submitted, I believe the assessor, we have a preliminary issue for request. Maybe not. I thought we had a request for non-compliance here.
Yes, we do.
We do.
Okay, good.
Okay, sorry. Somehow I jumped ahead here. What happened? Not in the right order.
Yeah, appears to be like on the third one, but it is really the second one, so.
Yeah, okay, there we go. 1466. The assessor requests that the burden of abuse be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation. We shall start with that preliminary issue to the assessor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. We are seeking non-compliance. There is a history of non-compliance, as you can see on page 2. 2016 is the last time we received submission of an income and expense questionnaire. Below it shows the documents that were mailed out, and at the bottom is the registered mail code, as you can see under the UPC for the second letter that was being mailed out, which will be on page 7. On page 3 is the first letter dated April 13, 2023. Page 5 and 6 is the empty questionnaire that had been mailed out. On page 7 is the second letter, in which was mailed out dated June 9th, 2023. And there at the top left showing its registered mail code. Page 9 and 10 is also the empty questionnaire that was mailed out. We believe that our evidence support the non-compliance.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Story, any questions on the evidence presented regarding the non-compliance request?
Yes, I do, sir. Thank you. Ms. Durochny, I'm looking here at the evidence, and can we be clear that the relevant year is 2022, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then 2013 to 2020, that would not have any application to our analysis today. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. Now, this letter, I think it's showing me that it was mailed to 820 boroughs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and 820 boroughs is St. Mary the Protectress Orthodox Church, correct?
I'm not certain on that.
Okay, and just to pull your attention, okay, so this is on assessor page 2. And this is the second little window, little set where it says, well, it says receive date. So it's showing 6/30/2023 at 12 a.m. So I guess I'm a little confused because that would indicate that this was delivered to the church in the North End on Friday, June 30th at midnight. Is that?
So where's the time?
Yeah, it says 12 a.m. Under receive date, first line.
I'm missing it.
Yeah, so it says it's for the one that's 2022 document year. If you just follow that to the right, it says received date 6/30/2023, 12 a.m.
What page, Jared?
Of yours, of your brief?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What page on my brief?
Page 2.
Sorry, no, that would be the date that we processed it in our records, I would believe.
Okay, and then my next question then is if we move 2 columns over to the right, it's showing the date created in August. So that seems, is that odd, or is that, can you explain why the receive date falls is earlier than the date created? That seems a little off to me.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay,
It's something to
then-
do with data services.
okay. And then I guess finally, typically when we see these requests for non-compliance, we'll see a signature that somebody indeed signed for it and received it. Do you have that in evidence?
We don't know.
Okay, and then my last question, Mr. Chair, and I apologize, I have to flip over to my brief because it's not included here. But in my brief, I included the form that was submitted. Now, does the city, Mr. Robney, do you have a record of receiving this, what I'll call a late submission from the owner? And this is on page, well, it's on page 44 of my briefing appendix.
No, we did not receive it.
Okay, well, so is there, I guess my final question and the most important one, Mr. Robney, is does the city have any evidence that would indicate that the owner received this form?
Well, with the registered mail, and that's why we send it registered mail the second time around.
Right, so the registered mail proves that it was mailed, but it doesn't prove that it was received. Is that a fair comment?
It's a fair comment,
Okay.
but if there's a history that they don't receive anything, we would expect them to notify us to change the
Right.
mailing address.
Okay, but again, 22 is the year that's germane to our discussion. Okay, Mr. Chair, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Story. I guess we'll consider that a little rebuttal evidence presented, shall we, from your brief?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Mr. Merritt.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have just a couple questions. Who is the registered owner of this property? Do you know, Madam Assessor?
As far as I know, it's the trustees of Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Cathedral.
So do you know who pays the taxes here on this property?
Yeah, I believe it would be them. I can see if I can find out. It is them. We receive checks from Ukrainian Orthodox Cathedral.
So for the non-compliance issue, I think there's been 2 years where they've sent out or request and they've never complied. Is this correct?
Correct.
Okay. Have you looked at this property at all?
Not an inspection, no.
Okay, I thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Mr. Purvis, any questions of the assessor?
Sorry, just a couple. Looking on page 3, the letter of April 13th.
Yes.
Okay, just to confirm, that letter was sent by regular mail?
Correct.
And did you receive a return to sender? Was it city at all, or?
It did not come back to us, no.
Okay, and on the letter of June 9th, 2023, the express post receipt that's on page 2 in the bottom there, that's the receipt for that June 9th, 2023 letter?
Correct.
And did you require a signature on delivery, or is it just express post? It was just delivered?
It's my understanding that it just goes out registered mail.
Okay, so it just gets delivered. It's not like Pure Later or FedEx where they require a signature.
Not that I know of, no,
And was that letter returned to sender the June 9th?
it was not, no.
That's my only questions.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. I'm looking on page 2, please, and I'm looking at that registered letter, that Canada Post, Express Post, I guess, certified documentation. And from what I'm reading here, it wasn't deliverable to the address, so they took it to Inkster Park Post Office, Shoppers Drug Mart. They've stamped it there as being received
Okay, yeah,
in the yellow,
yeah, I see that.
because it wasn't if it was registered, they wouldn't leave it if there was nobody to accept it at the original address. So it looks like the carrier took it to Inkster Park Post Office and registered it there as being left for somebody to pick up. I guess they must have left a notice that there was a registered mail waiting for them at the original address. Would that be accurate?
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so
From what Jared says, I'm under the impression that they did receive it if they ended up thinking that they sent it to us. But he had
No,
suggested,
Phil,
no?
I'll get to that in my evidence, but and just to be clear, just while we're on it, these registered letters do require a signature. That's the very purpose of sending a registered letter, and typically we'll see another chart from the city. And Mr. Hutchins, you're quite correct, it does appear that it was left at the Inkster Park, the drugstore. And the post office, the post office in the Shoppers Drug Mart. And I used to be in the shipping business, so I know that when you go to pick stuff up or whatever, you get a notice and then you sign on a digital screen, and that imprint is typically in the city's evidence, or there'll be another window that shows non-deliverable or some such thing. But my very point, Mr. Chair, is that we can't confirm that this was delivered to the owner, and I'll get to my my point about what they did submit, and it is I'll show you when we get to my
okay. So far we've got evidence by the assessor that the registered mail was failed delivery at the original address, was taken to an Inkster Shoppers Drug Mart, Inkster Park Post Office, and left there. And that's the information we've got so far. And I think you'll probably, Mr. Story, you'll probably deal with what you think happened after that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a clear picture from the assessor's point of view. Okay. So Mr. Story, your turn.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so and again, just to be clear, the a history of non-receipt or whatever is not germane to our discussion, but just to be very clear, this was tried in the last cycle and it was not accepted by the board, just so we're being very clear if we're talking about the last cycle, which again should have no application, but just for the interest of context, I am letting you know. So on page 42 of my brief, oh wait, not 42, where are we here? 44, I should say.
Okay, maybe wait, Mr. Story, can you wait for us to get there, please?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll wait for everybody to have access to your brief and page 44, I believe you said.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. If you don't mind waiting a sec, we'll all get there. Does the assessor have it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Purvis, do you have it?
Yeah.
Mr. Merrick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, when you're ready, please, Mr. Story.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. And so if we look at page 44, I'd like to draw your attention to the it says RE request for property sale and income/expense information. And you can see that there's a field for roll number and property address. Now, when these forms are sent to the owner, they are prescribed with the property group, with the address and the roll number. It's printed right onto the form that goes to the owner. However, you can go on the City of Winnipeg website and you can print out a blank copy that does not have a prescribed address. I don't know, not the group, and it doesn't have the roll number. You can simply write that in yourself. That's what's been done here. You can see that that is not, and you can contrast that with, again, page 3 of the city's evidence, where when they send it out to you, if you're the owner, it'll have the roll number, it'll have the civic address. In this case, the owner clearly took a form from online. They printed it out. They put all their details here. You can see they showed you that there was no income because it was a vacant property at the time. They've included their annual expenses, and they've even included a note, I believe. Yes, they did. They included a note on the where is it? 48 under comments. So ultimately, what I think has happened here, and we can certainly work on ameliorating this, but I think that when these registered letters land on the steps of a church, there's no one to, I don't know what time it was. I think maybe that midnight is erroneous, but these forms get left at a post office somewhere, and so we can't prove that they were picked up. Now, what we can show is that the owner did realize that there was an issue, and he did reply. Now it's late. I mean, he sent it in. I think he dated it October, so he did send it in late, but he did make best efforts to fix the situation when he realized that these had not been sent in. So ultimately, from our perspective, for the penalty to have application, it has to be for a full non-compliance. That means that we have to prove that the letter was sent. Okay, we can see that that's true through the registered letter process. But we also have to prove that it was received, and that we cannot prove. We have no signature. If we had a signature, I would say, okay, they received it. You can see that they failed to comply, but in this case, we do not have that. And that's a crucial piece of evidence when we're applying a fairly heavy penalty, frankly. So in this case, what I've showed you is that the owner has indeed printed off a blank form. They have indeed submitted it to the city. So I don't think that it would be fair to apply the non-compliance penalty, but I do think that going forward, we ought to speak with the owner about how to ameliorate this, because it is a unique situation where there's a registered letter going to a church, and I don't think that's necessarily the best situation if we're going to end up with forms that are just sitting in the dead letter office at the post office. So I don't think that's a good situation. However, I don't think it's appropriate to apply the penalty in this case. So I have provided you in my chief evidence with the compliance, though it is a late submission. But again, I would put all the weight of my argument on the fact that we cannot prove that this was ever received by the owner. And in that case, I don't think that the penalty should apply. So I will leave it there. I think it's fairly clear, but I'm happy to take your questions on the non-compliance matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the assessor have any questions of the applicant information presented?
Few questions. So the client is aware that income and expense questionnaires are to be completed and mailed in. How was this one sent in because we didn't receive it? So it goes both ways.
Right.
How do we know it was sent in?
Yeah, I think he emailed. That's a great question. I think he emailed it in, but I'm not sure. He could have mailed it. That's a great question. I don't know. I know that he completed it. He sent it to me, said that it was completed, but I don't know if he had. I would assume that it was emailed in, because the email is highlighted there on the form. But I'm not sure if it was by snail mail or email. I would guess that it's email, but that's speculation.
And along the same lines, that your client is aware that these are to be completed, why hasn't the mailing address been rectified previously?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's not a REIT or a, you know, an owner of, bunch of portfolio of income producing property, so they're not a particularly, well, they're not a institutional investor, let's say. They own a bunch of property in the north end in and around the church. So it's, I would guess that it has to do with the fact that it's not a, they're not an institutional investor, let's say. And I will certainly, I will commit to ensuring that they get these in, and will certainly help them, but I would assume that it has something to do with the fact that this is sort of this is not their core business, let's say. They're the trustees of a church that owns a little bit of real estate, and the bulk of what they do is manage a seniors villa on Burroughs next to the church. So this is not their core business. I suppose that if there's a failure, it's likely due to that.
And I agree with you, we should have it rectified. I'm reading our notes and there's nothing that has been returned to us. Even all the tax notices have been mailed out. So if they aren't receiving something, we should rectify it right now, but
They're likely on tip, right? So it's if their tax bills were going there and they weren't paying their taxes, that would be a major concern, but I'm guessing that they're likely on a monthly tip program. That would make sense to me.
No, actually, we've been receiving checks for the payment, but that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Curtis, any questions of the applicant?
I don't have any questions now.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Story, but you basically said, though, that the applicant has completed the documentation that was to be forwarded to the city, but it's late.
Yes, yeah, no doubt. It is past the deadline outlined from the city. Yes.
Okay. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, I am looking on page 45. Is this the form you're saying that they submitted late? The income expense statement?
Yes, starting on 44, but 45 is the meat of it. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So they declare no income because they say it was vacant, is that right?
Yes, if you follow under property information, it says total leasable 6,000 square feet, average percentage of space vacant 100%. At the time, right, it was a completely vacant building.
So basically all they've submitted here is the expenses on the property.
That's right. There was no income being generated, but they did fill in the utilities, the insurance and the expenses. Yeah.
And it's your submission that this was sent to the city and received?
I can't confirm that it was received by the city, but by the owner's admission, it was sent to the city. So, but it wasn't sent registered mail with a signature or any such thing, but I believe my sense is that it was likely emailed to the city. But again, I'm not sure that would be the most likely scenario.
Okay, I guess my question is to the assessor. Mr. Story is saying it was a late submission. What is your policy on that when requesting non-compliance?
Typically, if we're aware of a late submission, we can grant an extension, but because it wasn't inquired, it's considered late.
In your opinion, it wasn't received, or that you don't know if it was received. You have no record of it being received. I think that's
correct. This is the first of seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm gonna ask the assessor to summarize their position, and then I'm gonna ask the applicant to summarize their position, please.
I would say that due to the history of non-compliance and with the client being quite aware that we expect to have income and expense questionnaires completed by a certain date, that we are seeking non-compliance.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Story, before you go, I was looking at that page 45, and it appears that this is filled out by I guess I would call it a volunteer building committee member, is that right?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Story, please summarize your position.
Yes, sir, thank you. Okay, so I guess first off, the position or the penalty is or can be quite severe and should be applied in cases where there is clearly non-cooperation, full non-compliance. In this case, there are, I suppose, two major factors to consider. One, we cannot prove that the owner received the request. That's crucial. Secondly, we can see that once this issue came to light, they did make best effort in filling this out and presumably sending it to the city in order to not be non-compliant, but to cooperate with the assessor's request for information. Now, this issue of a history of non-compliance, again, it was not accepted in the previous cycle. I'm guessing it's likely, I wasn't the agent attending to it, but I'm guessing it was a similar situation, and the board in that case did not accept the non-compliance. And then I suppose thirdly, and this is a minor point, but when it comes to a property that's completely vacant, I'm not sure how much value that would actually add to the assessor's model in terms of developing net rents or some such thing, nor are they being blindsided effectively by any information that was not provided to them. The expenses are what they are. They're not out of line with market, and the rental income was effectively zero. So I agree. It's important that all owners of commercial properties submit income and expense within that time, but ultimately the assessor has not proven that this has been was received by the owner. And I guess secondly, we see that the owner did try to make best efforts, which should carry some weight. And again, it is Mr. Ashton, you pointed out quite correctly. These are volunteer building committee members. These are not real estate professionals. So I think that ultimately they've done their best to try and ameliorate the situation. And in this specific instance, I would ask that the penalty not be applied on for those reasons. And that's my summation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mrs. Harlan, I'm going to ask you to remove the applicant and the assessor. We're going to recess the hearing and consider the information presented and make our decision on the non-compliance request, please.
All right, just a moment, please, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Harlan. I will now call the hearing back to order. The panels considered the evidence presented by both parties, and it is our decision to grant or allow the request for non-compliance. Therefore, the burden of proof shifts to the applicant, Mr. Story. You will proceed first. If you would wait for us to get to your brief, please.
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Story, when you're ready, please. We're dealing with 2025 Realty Assessment Appeal, address 1466 Arlington Street, file 24-2075. When you're ready, please.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay, so here we are at 1466 Arlington. We have let's call it a legal non-conforming use. We've got an industrial building originally constructed in 1921, and it is right in the middle of a completely residential area in the north end. This is Arlington and Magnus, or it's Arlington between Magnus and Burroughs. So I have visited this property, I've inspected it, include some photos for you. The original building, for context, was built in 1921, 4,800 square feet. There was an addition in 1963 of 1,560 square feet. The wall heights are only 14 feet tall, which would be considered obsolete in modern industrial standards. And the land to building ratio is also extremely low, at only 1.16 to 1. So this property is built up right to the property lines. So that would also be a consideration. It is wood frame, according to the assessor here, I suppose it's a brick veneer. And I would classify it or typify it as being in below average or substandard condition. Again, I visited it. The previous use leading up to this cycle, there was a group called Scope, and that would be a supported employment group. So they help folks who have barriers to work get on the job training, and they had a social enterprise that was effectively a thrift store. So they worked hand in hand with the folks who were moving into the villa. So as the older folks moved into the care home or the assisted living right next door, they would often donate their household goods, and then they would be sold, and the folks working at Scope would gain some on the job training in retail. So that's the last use leading up to the reference date. There was a period of vacancy, and now they have some sort of temporary or seasonal renters, or one at least, and then another where they're trying to lease the back part of the property to no avail. So ultimately, we have to look at this for what it is, and it's we have an older, very old property. Again, legal non-conforming use, industrial warehouse in the middle of the north end. So very difficult to find rental comps, but I did provide you on my page 11 with a number of comps. It started indexing them at 22 to 34, so I'll use those numbers, but that's an error. Ultimately, you can see that all of these properties have superior zoning. They're either M1 or M2. So it's manufacturing. That can't be done in our property. Our property is C2 zoning, very different. Our properties in our comp table, they have wall heights that are generally superior, save for one. They're typically between, well, or save for two, I suppose. They're typically 19 to 24 feet, something like that. That's more it's more like what we would expect to see in our industrial market. However, I've highlighted two inputs here on Poplar Avenue. Now, I've been in that property as well. That's an older, call it a loft warehouse. Now, that's a very good comp. It's very close in terms of size. It has only a 1.38 to 1 land to building, so obsolete land to building, such as ours. Now, I should point out the other comps here. I didn't include it, but those land to building ratios range from about 2.03 to about 3.38. Now, we would apply, typically we'd apply an adjustment in our cap rate for land to building ratios that are below 3 to 1. 3 to 1 is a minimal expectation. So 1.16 to 1 is completely out of sorts with what we'd expect to see. The two on Poplar though are 1.38 to 1. So that's a good comp. I've been in this building, and I mentioned Scope, and in this building on Poplar, they were running a thrift as well. So similar utility, which I think is important. Now it's in Elmwood, but I think it's fair that if we're comparing the North End to Elmwood, I think those are reasonable comparables. I will say though that this section of Poplar, it has residential, but it's mostly rental apartments, not as many houses, whereas ours is just mainly detached single family homes. So with all that being said, the average rents of our comps, which again include a number of superior properties, average $675 a foot with a median of $7. However, if you take the two inputs on Poplar, and again, those are rents that are running at April of 22, so very close to our reference date, 463 and 602. So if we average those, that's about just $533 a foot. Yeah, that'd be $533 a foot. So for the purpose of this exercise, we're using $6 a foot. Vacancy, I don't believe is in dispute. We've used, I believe, 4.5%. Sorry, no, 10%. It's the other one we're at 4.5, 10%, and that's based on this history of vacancy. There's currently still some vacancy, so one would expect this property to have higher than average vacancy. So we've applied a slight adjustment there. So 10% is our vacancy. Now, in terms of our cap rates, we've provided you with a standalone cap rate study, but it's summarized. Actually, all the points that I wanted to speak to are effectively summarized right here on my page 21. We've looked at a number of sales in the market, and you can see the average cap rates for the sales that we've looked to were 6.85, the median of 6.43. The minimum was 5.75, so it'd be considered a very good lower risk investment industrial property, and then what we'll call a non-investment grade property at 8.64. That's fairly high on the scale, but that's on Wall Street. Now that would be our best comp, to be certain. So based on the sales that we've reviewed and based on some of the comments that I've made, so when we adjust for site-specific factors, we consider age, we consider location. So the north end would be considered typically an inferior location, certainly this section. The age is over 100 years old. We have very low wall heights. We have a very low land to building ratio. So we have a number of challenges with this property and have therefore applied a cap rate of no less than 8%. So on my page 23, you can see the workup. Now we came to our final value, and ultimately we come to a value of $384,621 based on the inputs that I've mentioned, which we then round to $385,000. I think is quite fair. I think that frankly the market view of this property would likely be that it's effectively a tear down. We'd probably be looking at land less demolition, but we're not quite there yet. So we have worked it up on income as opposed to cost. So we've come to $385,000. I've included some photos. You can go through them. It will, I believe it should support my comments that the property would be considered inferior. If you look at page 29, where they have some cars in there, it has a wood floor. So that would limit the amount of or the type of industrial use that we would typically see. We don't generally see wooden floors. That I suppose is a function of the age of the property. So that's there. That was very interesting. There's also a great deal of nuisance behavior in the area. The owner let us know that they had to remove some of the windows. They were being broken constantly. The back door had been hacked with a hatchet for people trying to break in. So there are some substantial concerns around what I'll call external factors and related to nuisance behavior as well. And that just further supports that 8% cap rate, which again is on the higher end of the range, but fully supported here in this, from our perspective, after visiting the property, speaking with the owner, and reviewing the comparables. So I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, but we feel very confident in the value of $385,000. And with that, I'm open to your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Ms. Durakani, do you have any questions on the applicant's evidence presented?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Story, on your page 23, you had said that our vacancy was the same, but I'm noticing that yours is 10%.
Right, yeah, no, I corrected myself. I think on Madison, we're both at 4.5, but I indicated 10% based on the fact that we have some chronic vacancy over the life of this property that should be elevated above the 4.5–5%. So that is the justification for the higher vacancy, yes.
And then a question on your page 11, your comparables there.
Yep.
Could you summarize why you applied a rental rate of $6 when your average is $6.75 and median is $7?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. Go through all of these if you'd like, but I can tell you what happens in all of these units, and I can certainly tell you that it would not be, for the most part, I don't know that you'd be able to achieve the same utility in our subject as you can in these properties. Now, what I've done here in order to provide some market comparables is look to the general area in the Northwest. I've looked for older buildings. Now, I haven't found anything from the 1920s. I don't know of any, besides Poplar. Most of the industrial stock in the Northwest is from the middle 1970s. That's when that those industrial parks, or that industrial park, was built generally. And then, of course, I'm looking for comps that satisfy the condition of approximately 6,000 square feet of leasable area. So I've used these to show you and to show the board the market. However, they're not comparable without adjustment, and I think that's very important. So I've mentioned here our property is zone C2. That's a general commercial, more retail oriented style of permitted use in terms of zoning. All of the comps are either M1 or M2. So that is superior. Our land to building, for example, limits the utility of this property. You can't do anything typically that would require a great deal of loading with a 1.16 land to building. Access to the back of this property is through a residential back lane. That's very atypical in terms of industrial properties. All of these properties that I've used have superior land to buildings, but I did try to use properties that had a sub 3-to-1 land to building, because that is an issue and that should be reflected in the rent, and indeed it does appear to be so. So ultimately, you're quite correct. The average of the comps that I've presented is $6.75, the median being $7, but I don't think they're truly comparable without adjustment. What I have done is highlighted the two on Poplar, which I think are quite good. I was surprised to find this one actually, and I was keen when I realized that I had been inside this building. I've been inside the subject, and I've been inside the property on Poplar. And I can tell you that these are about as close to being comparable as you're going to find for a property like this. However, Poplar does have superior zoning, and it's in an area that has a bit of a industrial retail character, whereas ours is almost purely residential. So when I look at those two rents and I see, okay, 4.6 or $4.63 and $6.02 for units that are, between 5,000 and 5,500 feet, and they run pretty close to the reference date, April of 22. If we average those at 533, I think I'm very, very, I think I'm dead on by using $6. I think in fact I could use 550, but I don't want to distort the value of the subject. So sort of a long answer, but I suppose the crux of it is that it's difficult to find comps for a property such as this because it is very unique in a way that makes it inferior in the market. These comparables would require some adjustment. But if we look to the two on Poplar, which I think are the best comps by an order of magnitude, quite frankly, those are indicating an average of $5.33. I feel very supported at $6.
One last quick question. In regards to your comparables again, your Poplar, what is the actual effective age for that comparable?
The effective age, I'm not sure. That would be in your system. But we know that building was built in 1921. I can tell you by being inside of the units in that building that it is a storage warehouse. It does have that kind of almost like an older exchange district warehouse. It has that kind of feel to it, generally kind of unfinished. And that squares with with our property. Now, I don't know, maybe you can tell me what the effective age is.
I was unable to look at that.
Okay.
But in regards to our subject, it has two buildings, correct? It was built in 1921 and the second building was built in 1963. So in looking at your comparables.
It has one building, Mr. Rockney. It's one building. There's an extension. There's a small extension that was built in 63. I believe if we go back to the 1950s and 60s, I think this was a bakery many decades ago. And I think they built an extension on it in the 60s. But it sat vacant for some time, and then it was used as a as a thrift store, but no, there's one building, it's an extension, so it's not indeed two buildings, and you can see that if you visit it, or I think would imagine on your overhead photo. Yeah, no, it's just an extension of the existing building. It's not indeed two buildings.
Okay, so the extension was built in 1963. Do you
Yeah,
suspect
it
that
was, let's see here, just so I'm very clear, I have the figures. Yeah, so there was 4,800 feet that was built in the 20s, 1921. And they built 1,560 feet in 63. So that's an addition.
would you expect the effective age to change in that regard?
Well, after going through this building, not really. I mean, the way that you've worked it up here, you're saying that the effective age of the 1921 space is 1944. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that when we look at the building envelope, when we look at the actual build, it's pretty true to its vintage. I mean, there have been people who've gone through it and whatnot, but it's not a modern building by any standard. So if we want to argue if it's more like a 1920s or a 1940s, that's fine. But I can tell you that the space at the back where they're parking cars still has wooden floors in it. So it's pretty true to its vintage. It's a very old building. And I'm reticent to talk about effective age because I know that from the city's perspective, that alters the model. What I'm very comfortable saying is that this building was built predominantly in 1921 with an addition in 1963.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the applicant?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Story, have you gone through this building?
Yes, indeed, sir, I have. It was about, well, it was before evidence. My photos are in, so call it 3 weeks ago or so.
Okay. This building is basically a storage building, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The addition was added on later. The original part, what type of heating is there? Is that boiler?
Heating?
Yeah,
Oh,
heating.
That's great. I'm not sure. I didn't look at.
But the new part is probably gas, correct?
Yeah, I think it's gas, and I know that there's yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's a old boiler in the basement. I didn't see it. I did go through the basement. I have some photos. It's a good question. I'm not sure. Not sure about the systems.
Okay, so this building does have a basement then?
Yeah, and actually in my photos, you can see them in the basement is pretty rough. That's the first photo, actually, page 25. And I included that just so we can see that it's would not be considered separately leasable and would not have contribution in terms of, sometimes the city will put a rent on the basement area, but this is purely storage. You can see page 26 and 27, you can see sort of the little makeshift washroom down there, but yes, it does have storage in the basement. Very low clear heights, maybe 7 feet, something like that, maybe less.
Is there just the one tenant in there?
Right now, there's a fellow who's storing the ice cream bicycles that drive around the city in the summer. He's storing those in there. That's in one unit, and then in the other unit, they parked a couple cars, but there's no tenant.
Okay.
So very, very sort of tenuous, seasonal, month to month. Call it a low covenant tenant, not a strong covenant on that tenancy.
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Story. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Mr. Purvis, any questions of the applicant?
I have a couple. I'm gonna start with a couple questions about the pictures first, since we're all just there. So on page 29 and 30, we're looking out the open garage door.
Yes,
What's that space behind? Is that the back lane?
that's the back lane. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And that's a full, like both units have an overhead door like that?
No, so there's just the one overhead door in the entire property.
Okay.
But Oh, sorry, no, wait, hold on. No, yeah, there's the two doors. You can see the two doors on page 29. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so,
And those face right onto the back lane, and the adjacent properties are houses. They're single family detached homes, which is atypical for an industrial building.
okay, so then one side are these, there's the two parked vehicles, so they rent there as just a parking garage.
No, they're not actually, that's not a tenant. That's
Oh.
just somebody's got a car in there, but it's not a tenant at this stage. Yeah, that would be considered a vacant space. It's the space that looks sort of, it's starting on page 32. That's the space that they're currently using. That was the thrift store. Page 35, you can see it with the sort of a,
It says treasures in the window.
yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the space now that's being used for storage of the ice cream carts.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was previously the thrift store.
If those would be those Dickie D bikes that we all know.
Those are the ones. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. And they're in the old store space, that's where they're stored. They're not in the garage.
that's precisely correct. Yes.
I had a couple of questions regarding your comps.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got them as index number 33, 34 for Poplar Avenue. Just to confirm, those are two separate buildings on Poplar?
That's two separate tenancies in the same building.
Okay,
So that is the same warehouse, loft warehouse, and those are two tenancies within that building.
okay, and that space is divided, like there's a wall.
Yeah, those are separately demised spaces.
Okay, so it's not a 10,000 square foot warehouse that is being shared. It's a 5,000 and a 5,500.
Yeah, they're probably on different floors. That would be my one would be on a different floor than the other. That would be my guess.
Okay, so it's a two-story building.
It would be, I think it's 4 or 5 actually. It's a large loft style warehouse.
Okay, so this one that's renting at $6 a square foot. Is that the main floor or?
You know what? That's a great question. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not sure. But that's a very good question. That would be my guess, only because you would expect a higher rent on the main floor versus on the second floor or some such thing. So not sure off the top of my head. I don't have my comp sheet in front of me, but I'd be speculating. But I think that's probably a good assumption.
And do you know if the other floors are leased, or is it just the two floors of a 4 to 5 story building?
Yeah, these are the two that I have in there that I had in my it's a good question. I didn't look through the entire building. What I did was I looked for spaces that made sense. So they may be re-demised on other floors into smaller units, but I don't want to, for example, use 2,500 feet if we're looking for a 6,000 square foot tenancy. So not sure how the others are demised, but when I looked for older properties adjacent to or in the Northwest, I was looking for, between, call it, I'm not sure what the exact parameters were, but it looks like about 5,000 to 7,500 feet, something like that, to fall in that range. And then trying to find properties that had older effective or original ages.
And then just looking at your other comps, there's so you mentioned the wall height of the property here on Arlington.
Yeah.
That for an industrial or commercial building, it's not very high.
Very low. Yeah, it's very low.
I think it's 14 feet, so I'm assuming, so it's so I'm just looking at 20, your index number 26 is a Shepherd Street property.
Yeah.
With 10-foot high walls.
Yeah, so that one is that's where they sell gear for, call it, fire and safety. So that will have more of a retail flair to it, let's say. So, but yes, those are very, very small, short wall heights as well. Yeah.
Okay, so it's zoned M2, but it wouldn't
Exactly.
be used no one would use it as a manufacturing space there either.
No, I don't think so. It does have very good land to building though, at 3.38 to 1. So that's the highest land to building of all of the comps. But you're right, it would be unlikely that they'd be using it for manufacturing. With 10-foot wall heights, it is more of a, call it a flex industrial space where we'd see sales, retail sales in the front and then storage in the back.
Okay, and then I'm also looking at your index number 30 on Paramount
Yep,
with the 14-foot walls.
yeah, so that is, those are folks who are doing consulting for the mining industry. So again, that would be sort of a flex space where you'd have some office type space in the front with storage in the back. So so certainly you're quite correct that these do exist, but I guess my comment would be that these low wall heights and these low land to building ratios limit the pool of tenants that an owner could potentially draw from, as the utility would be limited to a smaller group of prospective tenants.
Okay, and again, it's unlikely that with wall heights of those in those, there's 4 comps that I was looking at, because two are on 2 share space in Poplar. With
Yeah.
those wall heights, even though they're zoned for manufacturing, nobody's actually going to be manufacturing when they rent those.
No, they're probably not going to be manufacturing those on Poplar. Yeah, it would be, yeah, and again, it does have similar issues in terms of the land to building. So, and again, and that's reflected in the rents. Like those are 2 of the lower rents. So limited utility typically would lead to a lower rent. So yeah, that's correct.
And I'm just looking at the. I think that's my questions. I think the other questions were asked and answered by Mr. Merritt and Ms. Rocky, the Madam Assessor. Sorry, I don't want to butcher your name.
It was fine.
I was starting it and then I hesitated, and that was my mistake, was to pause. So I turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Mr. Story, we're on the corner of Arlington and what street? Would you know that?
This is
Magnus.
between Magnus and Burroughs.
Magnus? Okay. Okay, between Magnus and Burroughs. Okay, thank you. And the pictures that you have in your appendix, when were they taken?
So the first set were about 2 weeks ago. And
Okay,
the previous ones showing that space were from a previous inspection by a different agent. They're on file, but that shows the condition of that main floor, which is currently being used for the Dickie D carts. I couldn't get into that unit. It's speaking to the sort of unique nature of the tenancy. I was there on a day where the weather was bad, and so the ice cream carts were not going out, so nobody was there to let us into that unit. But I did have these photos that show the quality of the space. So my photos are the first set that show the back part, and then the basement, and then the other photos are from our file that were taken in relation to the previous assessment. But I did check, and I don't believe any permitted work was done there to ameliorate that space. So that is from our perspective, a good representation of that space.
okay, thank you. And I'm looking at the photos of the vehicles. So we've got sorry, page 29.
Yep.
First of all, I would say, in your opinion, isn't that a higher than 12 feet? When you've got a vehicle that's 7 feet tall and then a ceiling height that's probably double that at least or more?
Yeah, it does look, well, I don't think that vehicle's not 7 feet tall, but
Let's say,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, but it does
Okay.
look a bit higher. But I
Okay.
suppose when you look at the ceiling, there is the clear heights would not be terribly high. But yeah, I know it's a good comment.
okay. And the basement area, that's only a part area.
That's a part of it. Yeah, and that is underneath the that area where the cars are parked on that wooden sort of gymnasium looking floor.
Oh, So the basement is, there's a $4,000, 4,000 pound vehicle parked on a floor with a basement underneath it.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
you're gonna end up with a bowed floor if it sits there for too long.
okay. And it kind of looks like a shop, with the workbenches and a sink and everything for washing up on page, sorry, 31, I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
And
so, yeah,
it's some cinder block construction on that page 31 with the two vehicles parked there. Is there any income being generated on this property with
no,
these
so,
inside and?
yeah, so actually, I'll tell you, it's not much of a shop, there's just some stuff kind of kicking around, but basically, if you go to the final page, page 48, and I mentioned this in the comments,
Okay,
this INE, it does say, we had Scope as a tenant for many years, they left, we had trouble getting another tenant. The car repair shop next door was going to move in, but the owner got sick and backed out, so. And that's prior to these cars being in there, so not sure how you would necessarily run a repair shop in a building with wooden floors. I think that would be dangerous, frankly, so I don't think that would be, I think you'd have trouble getting an occupancy permit with that plan, but as of now, no, there's no income being generated in that
Okay.
back section.
So there's no income from storage of those vehicles on that one section that you know of?
I don't believe so, no, I don't believe
Okay.
there's.
And my second question is, you referenced the, what is it, Dickie D ice cream bicycle?
He is storing their bike.
Now, is there income from that?
There is, but it would be post-reference, so I didn't look to it. That
Oh,
would be after the reference.
okay, all right, okay. I believe that's all my questions. Oh, yeah, my last question was, is the leasable area, is it all heated?
Oh, it's a good question. I assume it is, but now I think it's safe to say that it is, but I'd have to check on that. I'm not sure. They do have overhead units in that garage space.
Yeah,
And the ice cream section probably doesn't, I don't know if it's heated, but I would assume it is. I've not made an adjustment for it not being serviced, but it's a good question. We'll certainly have to look into that when the BA comes out to make sure everything is in order.
okay. That's all my question, Mr. Story. To the assessor, we're gonna find your brief if you allow us to get back to your presentation, please. When you're ready, Miss Assessor.
Thank you. We would actually like to make a recommendation of 554,000. And I'll go ahead with my presentation. So it consists of, we have on record 2 buildings. So there's one building and an extension with 1 story is what we have on record. The actual year build 1921 to 1963, and that's with the first building in 1921, the extension of 1963. We have an effective year built of 1956 with the wall height of 14 feet. With a leasable area of 6,360 square feet and a land to plan area of 1.16. On page 11, we provided our map views showing its location. It is situated south of Inkster Boulevard, near Burroughs Avenue, east of McPhillips Street. On page 12 and 13 are our exterior photos provided. You will find our income workup on page 15. However, with our recommendation of 554,000, it changes our $7.80 to $7. So with the one premise of 6,360 square feet with a rent of $7 per square foot, we provide a potential rent of 44,520. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4% plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $40,400 $439. We've capitalized that at 7.3%, and which generates our capitalized value of $553,965, in which we rounded up to our final value of $554,000. On our page 14 has our rent comparables. They are all storage warehouse comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We provided 5 rent comparables with the lease starting in 2018 to 2021. Area range from 5,960 square feet to 7,170 square feet. Wall height range from 12 to 22 feet. An effective year built of 1954 to 1973. And a net rent of $6 per square foot to $12.50 per square foot. You will find our capitalization rates on page 17, which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.3 at the 80th percentile. Our cap rate of 7.3 is the highest of our 80th percentile. So based on the evidence provided, we believe that the assessed value of $554,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for that value to be confirmed.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
I do. I have a few, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Durochny, have you visited this property?
Not.
No, to your knowledge, has anyone from the city visited this property?
Not at my knowledge, no.
Okay. Okay, and this assessment, this workup, save for the adjustment you just made to the rent, this is all model derived, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so just very quickly, and sorry, you said you're using a rent now of $7, is that right?
Which is the year median as well.
Right, okay. No, I asked because I just want to go through these columns very quickly on page 14. And I guess my questions have changed a little bit, but I do want to look at 1516 Inkster. Now you said these are all storage warehouses, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but the second one on Wall Street, that's a brewery and tap room, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not a storage warehouse. And then 730 Nairn, I handled that property as well. That's an auto body shop, correct?
Correct. They are
Okay.
classified as storage warehouses.
Okay, okay. Now, number one, that property, you're using an effective year of 1973, but that property was renovated, wasn't it?
Which one?
1516 Inkster. So that's the corner of Inkster and Shepherd. It's right next to the old Tim Hortons. It's a Carpet Value, Imperial Soap, and I think there's a battery distributor in that property. Are you familiar with that property?
I'm not, but those are the effective year that we have on
Okay.
file.
But okay, so I guess my question is, if that's a superior property, in a traditional industrial, that's in the Inkster Industrial Park, then if that rent is $6, then isn't $7 for our little warehouse in the north end? Does that not seem high to you?
Not necessarily.
Okay. But to be clear, you haven't visited this one, right?
No.
The house. Okay. Okay, I think I'll leave that there in terms of the comparables. Cap rate, has the city provided any sales to substantiate the conclusions of the model?
Is that in my brief anywhere?
No, I'm asking if there are any sales. Just to be clear, the city's not providing any sales to support the cap rate conclusions for this cycle, correct?
I'm not certain.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mr. Purvis, any question, or Mr. Purvis, any questions of the assessor?
Yeah, just regarding your comparables. What's the zoning for them? Are they also zoned for commercial or manufacturing?
I believe it's manufacturing. Each one are a little different. There's M1 and M2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
I was gonna say the one that's most comparable would be the one on Wall Street with the same, it's in the same market region and it's an M1.
okay, that one, the walls are significantly higher wall height. Looking at the building with the lowest walls at 21 Keenly side. What's currently occupying that space? Or when in the console
It's a welding company,
welding?
Atlas Welding.
And what's the ratio on that one? Do you know? The land? No. Okay, just to be clear, you're suggesting a reduction in your brief. You had rents at $7.80 a square foot. You're recommending a reduction of that number to $7. Are there any other changes beyond the rent reduction? Your cap rate staying the same as what's in your brief? Okay, and then the vacancy rate is also staying the same as the brief. Okay, so 7.3% cap rate, 4% vacancy, but it's 7, not 780. That's my questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Miss Barakami, I hope I corrected. I like to say that name. Anyways, you have a recommendation. I think you said 550,000, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
54, yeah.
Okay, right. Okay.
554.
So you're dropping the NOI around $5,000 compared to what you originally had, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And before you were using a rate of $7.80, and now can you tell me what the rate is? Is it $7 you're using now? I think.
Yeah, it was based on looking at the photos that Mr. Story had provided, gave us more of a feel of the building interior.
Yeah. So in listening to all the comments, etc., you've decided to do a recommendation, a verbal rec, because I don't see it in your notes or anything like that, but it's a verbal rec to 554,000.
Correct. It was a quick review a few days ago when he provided those photos.
Okay. But you're still using the same cap rate as the model produced in the first go round for the 619,000.
Correct.
I think that's all the questions that I have. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. To the assessor, the revised NOI, net operating income, is 40439. Is that correct? In your verbal rec?
You got, yes.
I think it is, yeah.
Yes.
40439, okay.
Yes.
All right. That's my only question. Does either party have a requirement for summary?
No, thank you.
We're good. Mr. Story?
Yes, sir, just very, very quickly. So ultimately our two big major points of contention here are the cap rate and the rent. Now we've changed the rent a little bit here, but I can't help but remark that Mr. Rockney had mentioned that Wall Street would be the most comparable. Now I know that property that used to be called Letterall. That was a place where you take your car, your promotional vehicle, and do decals, and that in those days, that was a comparable property to our subject. Now it's Barnhammer Brewing, so they have a nice tap room, they brew beer there, it has no relation to the property on Arlington, so that's number one. Number two, I think it's very important that this cap rate be reflective of the facts of the matter, and in this case, once again, we have a legal non-conforming use of a very old warehouse in the middle of the north end surrounded by residential. That cap rate at 7.3 is far too low. I think I will leave it there, but I would respectfully submit that our value is more in line with market view, and I would suggest that based on our cap rate study and our request is once again more in line with the market view based on the very, very unique nature of this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. That concludes item number 2, file number 24-2075. And I'm going to suggest a recess for 8 minutes, please.
Can we take 10?
Okay, 10 minutes, please. Thank you, Mrs. Harlan. I'll now call the hearing back to order. Next item on the docket is item number 11, file number 24-1857. Address is 485 Madison Street, and we're dealing with a 2025 Realty Assessment Appeal. Roll numbers 070011255500. Mr. Rockene, please, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the address of 485 Madison Street. The assessed value for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023 is $591,000. A bit of an error on our first page here. Originally it was $660,000, but we had reviewed the 2025 value after changing parameters in the model. The income workup on page 7 is correct. It consists of one building with 3 premises with 1 story, built in 1958, with a wall height of 14 feet, with a leasable area of 5,000 square feet, land to plan area of 1.33. Our recommendation is to confirm the assessed value of $591,000 due to pending 2024 Municipal Board Appeal. On page 3, we provided map views showing its location. It is situated in Polo Park area near St. James Street. We provided exterior photos on page 4 and 5. On page 7 is our recommended value income workup. It consists of the 3 premises adding up to 5,000 square feet and a blended rent of $7.41, provide a potential rent of $37,041. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4.5%, plus expenses at 3% with a shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $33,413. We've capitalized that at 5.65%, in which generates our capitalized value of $591,381, rounding down to our final value of $591,000. On page 6 has our rent comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We've provided 5 rent comparables, all in the same market region as the subject property, with a lease starting in 2018 to 2022. Area range from 1,040 to 4,000 square feet. Wall height range from 14 to 17 feet. And an effective year built of 1963 to 1967, with a net rent of $7 to $8 per square foot. You'll find our capitalization rates on page 9, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile. Our cap rate of 5.65 falls in this range. On page 11 to 14 is the income and expense questionnaire provided to us, advising the gross income and rent at $57,850. Page 13 shows the monthly gross rent to be $13,850 $11 and $15 for the tenants here. And so based on the evidence we provided, we believe that the assessed value of $591,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Story, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
Yes, sir. Okay, Mr. Rockney, looking here on page 1, sorry, a bit confused, recommendation to confirm based on the fact that there's an outstanding appeal. Don't know that I've seen that before. Why would the board confirm it based on the fact that there's an outstanding appeal for the previous cycle?
It is something we just input sometimes.
Okay. Okay, so 1958 is the actual year. 1958 is the effective year. Would that then lead you to the conclusion that no substantial work has been done to this property to extend its useful life? Is that typically what that means?
Correct.
Okay. That land to plan, can we agree that 1.3 to 1 is very, very low, substandard by today's industrial standard? Is that a fair comment?
Not necessarily low, but typical.
Okay. All right. Have you visited this property?
I have not, no.
Okay. Has anyone from the city visited this property?
Not that I am aware of, not recently.
And this is all modeled, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That cap rate of 5.65, that's very close to your 20th percentile. So can you tell me why, if the 20th percentile according to the city is 5.35, which is lower than the brokers, what is it about this older unimproved property with low ceiling heights, low land to building that would put it on very close to the best investment opportunity based on your chart? That seems out of sorts to me.
Well, it's not under the 20th percentile, so it's still within the range. And it's still considered a decent property. There is a tenant that is occupying the space. And as you are aware, the industrial properties are still booming.
Okay. Okay. Did you consider the income and expense that was submitted to you for the purpose of this exercise?
I did. I mean, it's gross, and we tend to reduce it by $4. So that would give the total of $9.11, and the other one $11.
Sorry, why $4? That's not based on the actual expenses. That's based on your shortfall?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the assessor?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Purvis, any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. To the assessor, please. I'm looking on your page. What page am I on? Come on. Page 7, please. Nope. Yeah, 7. On your workup, so there are 3 separate leasable units in this building, is that correct? And is it owner occupied partially or?
It is. The first space is being occupied, and the second one, after speaking with Mr. Story, he had advised that the second one is no longer occupying, but at the time of the income and expense, they were both being occupied. So there was only the third one of the 700 square feet that was vacant.
Okay. Thank you. And we are located on Madison. How far north or south on Madison? Can you tell me that?
It's right on Madison.
You probably got a site map, but I think I've skipped by it.
Yeah, page 3. I wish I had done one closer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, near Best Buy there.
Oh, yeah, okay, behind Best Buy. So off between St. Matthews and Silver. Okay, now I got it. Okay. Thank you. That is my only question. Mr. Story, when you are ready, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, and just to be clear, this property is not owner occupied. I think you asked the question and it's leased. I'll go through that though. Okay, so we are indeed on Madison. It is indeed between Silver and St. Matthews. This is right across from the it's called Long Quill or Yellow Quill College. And then there's a new hotel that's I believe the land right across the street is considered urban reserve land, if you know that little section. So it's a little bit off the beaten path. Okay, the building is indeed built in 1958. I was able to inspect this property on this past Friday. So scheduling didn't work out where I had the photos available for the brief, but I can certainly speak to it. I walked through the entirety of the building with the owner. There is a call it an engineering group who tenant the main unit. And what we learned on inspection was that those two units in the back, that are I think 700 and 800 feet, or 800 and 600 feet, those are storage units. They do not have a washroom facility, so they're not capable of occupancy for a traditional tenant. They're simply storage. So the printer who was renting that one space was he had his equipment in there and he was storing goods. So it's not Mr. Chair, you'd asked if they were 3 separately leasable premises. They're not. There's a main area which is the engineering firm, and then there are 2 very, very low grade storage spaces at the back of the property. Once again, we have only 14-foot wall heights. We have an incredibly low land to building of 1.3 to 1. Now that's from the 1950s. So that's, in the 1920s, that was it was more typical, but in the late 1950s, that's a bit rare. So we have to consider that in our cap rate conclusions. I've included a number of, I've actually showed you we've netted out the leases. The rent that's actually being collected is very low. So that engineering firm, once you net out the expenses, they're not $4, they're closer to $8. And you end up with a rent of about $4.29. So they're below market. The rents are very, very low. So instead of applying the actual blended rents, which work out to about $4.84 per foot, we've looked to the market for rents that we consider to be at market for comparable properties. So it's very fortunate in this case that I handle a number of these properties on Madison, and they have the same owner. And they are similar vintage, they're similar quality. These would be considered low grade properties. So you'll see the first 3, and just to continue on with the erroneous numbering, I started at number 2 as opposed to number 1, but indices 2, 3, and 4, those are right next door. They're very similar. It's the same owner, it's the same degree of finish, same quality of finish, and those rents run from $4.98 to $6.95. Let's see here. Those also, those are again very low land to building, very low wall heights, and they are right next door. You could throw a stone and hit the building next door, and that's about as good as a comp as you're going to find, I think. So those run from $4.98 to $6.95. We've also looked at this set of properties on Bannister, these tenancies. Now these are a little bit newer, 1969. Those rents run from about $6 to $6.50. And they do, that's a M1 zoning. Those are 14-foot wall heights, so same as ours, with a slightly superior land to plan at 2.3 to 1. Last one is on, or sorry, number 8, that's on Border. Again, that's newer, slightly newer at 1965, coming at $6.75. But that's a 3.4 land to building. It has 14-foot wall heights and it's zoned M2. They store paint. I'm reticent to rely on that one because typically facilities that have flammable materials require a different degree of fit up. So our property would not provide the same utility, but it is similar in terms of location, age, and wall heights, though it does again have favorable zoning and superior land to building. Number 9, that has 17-foot wall height, and it is M2 zoning, and it has a superior land to building at 2.87. So what we've done, if you follow me to page, to the next page over, you can see that we've adjusted those rents. So for the engineering firm, we've adjusted to $6.25. Again, I've been through this property. It is in it's utility grade, and the rents should reflect that. The printing storage space at 618 is fine. That's a short-term storage rental, and I've actually applied 650 to that 600 square foot storage rental, and I think that's okay. It's maybe a touch high, but in terms of economies of scale, it's only 600 feet. So our ultimate blended rent per foot then is $6.27 per foot, and that puts us squarely in the range of our average and our median of 623 to 632. And it's also supported again by those first 3 comps, which again are about as comparable as you can possibly get. So vacancy, this is the one where vacancy is not in dispute. 4.5 is fine, though there is some concerns with vacancy. That main what I'll call the bulk of the property is leased, so 4.5% is appropriate in this case. The shortfall at only $4 per foot is a bit low, but we're accepting it for the purpose of this report. And then we get once again to cap rates. So we've talked a fair bit about cap rates for these older, lower grade properties, and just as a general comment, as we all know, the capitalization rate is the numeric representation of risk, and as it relates to a return to the investor on a real estate asset. So a riskier property would require a greater yield, higher return. So that makes sense. When we look at these properties that would not be considered investment grade, we're starting at 7.5. This one is certainly in that range. It's not a class B. You can say that it's at the very low end of the class Bs, but it is effectively obsolete by today's standards based on its very low land to building, based on the quality of the property, based on its ability to or inability to achieve market rents. And of course the overall age. It's also not in a particularly desirable stretch of Madison for an industrial building. So we have to take all of those site-specific factors into consideration, and we did, and we've come to a cap rate of 7.5%. So with that being said, we've come to a value, total value of $367,661, which we then round to $368,000. I think that's quite fair. The balance of the brief includes the property details. It includes the assessor's workup, and then the income and expense mailer that I referenced. So, given some attention to the specific site-specific factors related to this property, we feel very comfortable at $368,000, and respectfully submit that the value ought to not exceed that figure for the purpose of our 2025 realty assessment. With that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Does the assessor have any questions of the applicant's evidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You had made a comment in regards to the cap rate and it pertaining to high risk. Why would you say this property in particular is at high risk?
Oh, sure. Okay, so my comment was that the cap rate is a rate of return to an owner. And effectively it represents risk. So higher risk properties require higher yields. That's the first part. Now, why this property is riskier? Well, it's built in 1958. It's not substantially improved. It is very, very basic, very utility grade. It has a very low land to building ratio. It has 2 units that do not have washroom access that can only be then used as storage. The history of economic profit is below market. And those are the major issues. So the property would be considered inferior by today's standard in the industrial universe. You made a comment that industrial properties are booming, and I think that's fair for the latest and greatest, for the new stock that's come on stream. But what effectively happens, Mr. Rockney, is when you have a great deal of new demand for new high quality industrial space, some of this older space, well, it is not as attractive as the new stock. So typically what you're competing for are tenants who are looking for very low rents in functional space, and that's exactly what we have here. So hope that answers your question.
A little bit. For your comparables, do you know, are they also at high risk? Do they have a high cap rate?
Do these properties have a high cap rate? Well, they didn't sell, right? So for assessment purposes, we would certainly make a similar application for the properties on Madison that we handle, but they haven't sold. We did include a number of sales for you to review. And I would suggest to you that the 5.65 that the model is suggesting is on the very, very low end of the range. The brokers who look at investment grade properties are starting at, I think, they're a little higher actually than. Yeah, I mean they're typically at 6%. Some are at 5.75. They go up to about 7.5. And that's for investment grade properties that are reviewed by brokers. We are not likely to see properties like this end up in a study by the brokers. This would fall outside of that range. So I think the model has erred, quite frankly, in placing this as a very low risk property, where from our perspective it should be on the very, very high end. 7.5 might be a bit low, but that would certainly put it as from our perspective as a low grade B and on the high end of the brokers charts, though I do not believe that the brokers would consider a property such as this in their analysis, but that's just my opinion.
A few questions about your comparables. I had a chance to look at your Bannister Road. You had it advised it was 51 Bannister Road. Is there a reason why you didn't include the $7.50 rent?
Sorry, in the same building?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I used, what is the size of that premise? I was searching by size, so not sure. These are the ones that came up when I inputted my search terms. So I don't know, but I did include 3 of them in that property. So yeah, why one was omitted, I'm not sure. In 51 Bannister, but you can see those 3 rents that are from 21, they range from $6 to $6.50, and I would suggest that's a superior property.
One last question in regards to your Border Street. We have it on record of a $7.25 rent. That was their step up. Is there a reason why you have it at $6.75?
Nope, but if you have some evidence for rebuttal to show us that it's $7.25, that would be fine. But this is what our records show. But I can certainly review that when I get back to the office. But that's what our our records are showing us on Border.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the applicant?
You're muted, Ron.
All right, I have none, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I thought you were thinking there before you asked. Okay.
Yes. Thanks.
Mr. Purvis, any questions of the applicant?
I was also expecting a very profound question from what Mr. Merritt was thinking, and was trying to come up with one of my own, but I don't have any questions for the applicant either.
Okay. I do have one, Mr. Story. The net rents that you've calculated here, the I&E income and expense statement provided gross rent, is that right? And you did a calculation to reduce them?
Those are gross rents. Yep, that's absolutely correct. And then what we did was we netted out the rents based on the expenses in the property. But that's where I mentioned, sir, that the rents then appear to be below market. So once you take that gross rent for the engineering firm, the first unit, you end up with a rent of something like $4.30 per foot once you net it out. So that's below market. We didn't apply that. That would be too low. We don't want to distort the value. Right, it comes to $4.29 a foot when you net that out. So that's why we did not apply that rent, though. And frankly, that's a good justification for a higher cap rate, because anybody who would purchase this property at that reference date would be buying that rent in place. That's a contract rent, and in order to bring that up to market, let's say, there's a certain amount of risk there as well. So we've not used $4.29, the netted out rent, we've used $6.25.
Okay. And then on the same page, I think you made reference to the fact that this was the same owner of all your rent lease comparables?
The first three on Madison.
First three, okay.
Yeah.
So
They're right next door. Yeah.
So was there a calculation done again were those gross nets with an adjustment by you bringing them to net?
Those are net. Those are net rents.
Calculated by you or declared by the owner?
Calculated by us in reviewing when we inputted them into our lease spreadsheet. Yeah, our database.
Okay. And you have used $6.27.
Yes, and that's based on $6.25 per foot for the engineering space, which is the bulk of the space. Now, when I prepared this, I didn't realize until I inspected the property, which is why it's very important to inspect the properties, that those two back units are storage only. So those actually should have a lower rent, but I'm comfortable with an overall blended rent of $6.27 per foot. However, in the future, we will likely look to that 800 and 600 square foot unit and monitor what goes on there, because it does seem as though those rents should be somewhat lower. Though we did see the printer pay $6.18, but that was for a short term, like a 1 year lease. So typically shorter leases are higher, but we would probably be looking at something a touch lower, but overall I'm comfortable with $6.27 a foot blended over the entirety of the leasable area.
Okay. Those units, let's call them 2 and 3, the small ones, 800 and 600 square feet.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting they should be one unit, or are they physically?
No, they're physically demised, but the issue with them is we put lower rents on them that would be equivalent to what we would expect if they were leasable for anything other than storage. They should have storage rents on them based on the fact that they don't have access to a washroom. And that was something that I discovered during the inspection last week.
Okay. So when they were being used, were they sharing the washroom with the engineering company, for instance?
Yeah, I think they were using the fellow was using the engineering washroom. So not an ideal situation, but I think that's what would have been going on. And I know he was working like, which I was able to show the photos to you. It's a very, very low grade space. I don't think anybody would have been in there for, 40 hours a week or some such thing. I think it's kind of just the process. Yeah.
So number, let's say take number 3, how much rent is that per month?
How much rent is that? Well, it's 3,900 divided by 12. So it's $325 a month for 600 feet of low grade storage space.
Okay. And do they have access, it showed 2 doors on the front of the building. Was one door access to the 2 smaller units?
No, the access to the smaller units is in the back. It's through the back of the building.
In the back, okay. And yet on the front of the building, there's 2 access doors. Is that the engineering on the front?
It's both of those doors are for the engineering. Yeah.
Okay. That is all my questions. Requirement for summary by either party?
Thank you.
Okay, you're good.
Very, very quickly, Mr. Chair. And thank you for taking the time to hear our concerns today. The cap rates for these properties, we talked about the rents, and in some cases they've been adjusted. I still think in for the most part they are too high given the quality of the space, but the cap rates being applied here by the model are extremely low. The modeled output, we have no idea how many sales were inputted into that model in order to derive that modeled cap rate. It's frankly it's a mystery. Now, Altus has been very transparent with the assessor, with the board. We've provided you with our standalone cap rate study. We've provided you with the analysis of our sales, and we've laid out our assumptions. So particularly on the matter of cap rates, I would respectfully submit that Altus has done a very good job of showing you the sales in the market. And in this particular case, for these 2 properties that we're left with on our docket today, these do fall into the range. They're non-investment grade, and they would require a much higher yield than what we would typically expect. So that is the rationale for applying the 7.5 and the 8% for these very unique properties. And I would encourage you to look through our cap rate study for greater detail. But I think I've summarized it reasonably well. There are some concerns that we have for these properties that would put them on the lower end of the quality scale, and thus they would require a higher yield to an investor. So thank you again for your time. We would respectfully submit that our submission be given weighted consideration based on the evidence that we've submitted here today.
Okay, Mr. Story. Thank you to Ms. Durochny and Mr. Story for appearing. We have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'll take us offline now.
Yes, please, Mrs. Harlan. Thank you.
Just a moment, please.
Sure.
See you again, Mr. Story.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Mm-mm-mm-mm.